Welcome back to Fast Friends with Dan Walsh. This is the podcast where we talk with the top 1% of 1% of the population in athletics, business, and life. Today, I'm your host, Dan Walsh. I'm a two-time Olympian, national champion coach, father, dad, and way too much to explain on this episode because I'm really excited to introduce our guest. So without further ado, with my team of Justin Faber, producer and co-host, and Steve Capola, our editor, we're ready to introduce my brother, my business partner, my teammate, my main man, my groomsman, my brother from another mother, Luke Walton. Justin, please tell the world how awesome this dude is.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I cannot really wait to introduce today's guest, the legendary Luke Walton, as you just teed up. Let me just give everybody in the audience a quick overview of who Luke is and what he's done over the last 20 years and really kind of what to look forward to in today's episode. So just a little bit about Luke. He has over 20 years of experience in elite level athletics, background in rowing and triathlon, both as a competitor and as a coach. Luke was a member of the U.S. rowing national team from 1999 through 2003, was a member of the 2004 Olympic rowing team where he competed in Athens, Greece. Remarkably, in his collegiate career at Cal Berkeley from 1998 to 2001, it was completely unblemished. Again, to unpack that, he's never lost a heat. He never lost a semifinal or a final en route to 4 straight Pac-10 and 4 national championship titles. Luke was later selected to the Pac-12 All-Century rowing team, which is an honor that's bestowed on a select group of top athletes from the past century. Luke would later go on after the U.S. national team to study and row at Cambridge University in England, competing in the world-famous and prestigious Cambridge-Oxford boat race, both in 2005 and 2006, which is, for those in the audience, the oldest and longest running collegiate competition, which goes back to 1829. So nearly a 200-year-old competition, which Luke was fortunate enough to compete in, not once, but twice. If his rowing resume wasn't impressive enough, Luke also has competed in and coached triathlon for the last 10 years from 2006 to 2016 and has a passion and knowledge for the sport that has helped countless athletes meet and exceed their training and racing goals day in, day out, year after year, even resulting in one of his athletes going all the way to the 2016 Olympic marathon trials. Between being a force on the water and on land, Luke is quite well read in politics, both as an undergraduate degree recipient from University of California, Berkeley, as well as a graduate degree recipient from Cambridge University in politics. This said, his chosen profession is actually his true passion, which is coaching, where he brings the expertise of world-class athlete and professional coach to all of his fitness endeavors. He strongly believes that exercise and healthy lifestyle are integral components of and directly related to higher quality of life at any life stage. He also believes that anyone can be an athlete and that physical fitness is not a vanity or a luxury for only a select few, but rather it is necessity for people to achieve healthier, happier, more productive lives. Luke, welcome to the show. Wow. Like beyond, man. Beyond.
Yeah.
So many questions. Our audience is in for a heck of a treat today. Good gosh, Luke, like, I mean, that was a long bio, but it was all, I couldn't cut anything out. Really, really damn impressive.
Dude,
so we are fortunate to have you on, bro.
And dude, it's the IRA weekend and you're the dude that never lost one. So like
never lost anything. I think that, I mean, that's one of the biggest questions I had right out of the gate is like, there's so much to dig into there. Just the 4 years we talked about on our last episode of guys training, for long periods of time without breaks, but 4 years of like that level of success before you even get to the national team, like, good gosh. Yeah, Dan, I'll let you dig into it a little bit, but wow, bro, like I'm excited. I'm excited to talk today.
Yeah. So Luke, we like to start off with the first question, and it's very much the why. And we kind of want to hear from your perspective. And this is for the audience to get it here from you. Why do you think you're here with the Fast Friends?
The origin story. First of all, thanks for having me, guys. I'm really excited to be here. You guys definitely know how to pump somebody up. I'm all fired up. Feels like this
we're just telling you your story. So
yeah.
it's all good.
But so the question is why? Why am I sitting here today? Why did you read a little bit, I guess, of a laundry list of a bio there? Seems a little long-winded when I hear it all read back, but yes,
because
all
you're
these things
old.
did happen.
It's because you're old. It's because you're old now.
That is probably part of the problem, right? So the why. The why is because my ears used to stick out when I was a little kid. I was born into a great family, great life, supported in everything. My parents are very supportive of everything that myself or my brothers wanted to pursue in life. They told us, pursue your passions. We don't care what you do. We just care that you're passionate about it. We want you to pursue your passion. And it's some of the very best and most maddening advice I've ever received in my life. And it served me very well to this day. That matched with my mom's famous phrase, life is a series of choices. And there's that positive guiding light that life is a series of choices, and the choices you make lead to where you're going. And then there's also the way that my mom uses it, which is one of us as a kid screwed up, and my mom would look at us and say, well, you know what, Luke? Life's a series of choices. So had that sort of guidance from my Irish Catholic mother. But going back to it, my ears used to stick out. So I was teased relentlessly as a kid, all through kindergarten, through elementary school, and into the 5th grade. And I was very shy as a result of that. I was very introverted as a result of that, and made a decision in between elementary school and middle school, and had corrective surgery and had my ears pinned back. And what that resulted in first was I wasn't noticed anymore for being different, because my ears weren't sticking out. I got into 6th grade, and I loved it. I loved that no one was paying any attention. I didn't have to deal with any negative attention. I wasn't getting bullied. I wasn't getting into fights. I wasn't having these problems. And at the time, I was an age group swimmer. I started swimming when I was 10 years old. I swam through elementary school, and I swam through middle school, and there was no high school swimming team or anything like that. Or excuse me, there was no middle school swimming team, and there wasn't going to be, so it was club to that point. And then it wasn't until I got into high school that it was then part of athletics in high school.
Sure.
And I had been sort of unnoticed for a period of time there, from throughout all my middle school years. And then I got into high school, and all of a sudden I was getting noticed again. But I was getting noticed for my athleticism. And that was different. It was a wildly different feel. And it was a good feel. And it was a bit of a drip for me. It was a little bit of a drug. I liked it. I liked being recognized for achievement. Not for the way that I looked or didn't look or anything like that, but because I was achieving. And so I had been a swimmer since I was 10 years old. And then by the end of sophomore year in high school, I was just burned out. I was done looking at the black line at the bottom of the pool, sometimes the blue line at the bottom of the pool, but that's about as much as it changed. And I was very isolated with my head under the water. And so it's just this kind of constant story of sort of isolation. And so I got to the end of my sophomore year, and I'm like, I don't know what I want to do. And yeah, I'm good at swimming and I can pursue this, but is there something else out there? And it just happened that my younger brother, in his 8th grade year, he's 2 years younger than I am, he had found a newspaper advertisement for the San Diego Rowing Club. And so his 8th grade year and my sophomore year, he was starting in rowing. And he finished his 8th grade year. I finished my sophomore year. And my brother Eric is like, dude, you got to try this out. Like, come try it out. So I went down to the San Diego Rowing Club in the summer between my sophomore and junior year. And they put me in an open water wary single. And they pushed me off the sand. And they're like, go and achieve. And I'm out there, and I flipped that thing 7, 8, 10 times. And I crawled back in, and then I started to figure it out. And I got the glide across the water. And then that was it. It was like swimming what? Doesn't matter. This is awesome. And then I found out just how great it was when I got injected into the team. And so there I was with the team, and now it's a team sport. I'm feeling the surge of an 8. I still remember my very first race in the fall, the San Diego Fall Classic, that happens in the second week in November, and we were all novices, and we get out there in an 8, and that was it. I was hooked. There was just no choice. From then on, it was just about taking as many strokes as possible at the highest level possible, and just figuring out how far I could take it. And that, Dan, I think is exactly why I'm sitting with you guys today.
Dude, that's awesome.
That's incredible.
Hey, quick questions just to help the audience for some context, Luke. Where are you from originally? So California, obviously. We're a lot of us on the podcast here are East Coast guys. So yeah, just give us some geography real quick. So it sounds like you were in the San Diego area, or?
Yeah, I grew up, born and raised in the San Diego area, North County, place called Poway, Poway. Grew up there, and that's about 40-minute commute from Mission Bay, where the San Diego Crew Classic is.
Sure.
And so every day, school would end. There were about 4 or 5 of us from Poway that would get into the car, drive down to practice, and drive back. So it was total commitment. There was a lot of time spent with rowing in high school.
But you had an unfair advantage with that commute, because every day you drove by Miramar and you got to see Top Gun in real life.
True.
Every day, while the
That's
rest
true.
of us on the East Coast had to live vicariously through Iceman and Maverick, and there
VHS.
you are, just
VHS.
watching the real thing.
That's true.
That's an
That's
unfair
true.
advantage of being a badass.
So just also quickly for context, because I think that this was really good to help us set the table, Luke. One, did your brother stay along for the ride with you throughout, until at least you graduated? And I'd love to hear where he kind of wound up too. Probably another episode, but just quickly. And then the second part, so just let me know that, because I think that it helps to have built-in, family support, like somebody to share that camaraderie with on that car ride, right? You're doing an 1.5-hour round trip every day, with traffic. So I just was curious on that, because obviously that's probably pretty interesting around the dinner table. I know that when I started rowing when I was like 14, it was like an obsession. Well, like you mentioned, like it was like part of rowing, part of the crew, it's like Saturday mornings every day. Like, so yeah, just curious.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, it's something, when you get to share that with family and share it with one of your brothers, it's incredible. And he stuck with it. He was recruited to row at Cal, and so he was a freshman in my junior year, and he rowed through freshman year. Took his rowing about as far as it was going to go, and he had to make a decision at that point because he was studying music. And he decided that he really wanted to focus on music full time. So, he made good on what my parents have always encouraged us to do, which is, follow your truest passions. And so after his freshman year, we were still at Cal. We lived together. We were, spending a lot of time together at Cal, but he was pursuing music exclusively from sophomore year forward.
And were you recruited out of high school?
I was.
Okay.
I was. And I mean, that was a huge gamble that they took on me. But, this is back when freshman rowing still existed.
Yep.
Craig Amercani saw something in me.
Because I was part of this. It wasn't a huge gamble, dude. You were invited to the junior national team camp, right?
That's true.
So Justin, Luke and I met actually on the junior team camp, which I think it's just funny because Steve had mentioned it last week. And so you're talking about being invited to where the top junior rowers in the country get to go. Now, you and I both being part of that know that there were a lot of kids invited to get an expensive t-shirt in a certain way. But I think that's got to be kind of part of it. You're trying to make an elite team in a very condensed amount of time. But like from my perspective, it's just so much different coming from my perspective where like nobody rowed where I was from. So like I was kind of like the first, like San Diego's was a rowing club has been established since like 18 something, isn't it?
1888. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's one of the oldest rowing clubs in the country as well. So like there's history there. I remember meeting you at that team and knowing that you were special there. Right. You not making that team is your story to tell, but it was a surprise to me, especially because we were about to be roommates. So I was bummed out. But
Well, Dan, the only thing I would say is just chronologically, the conversations with Cal and the conversations with others, those were happening junior year. And I wasn't invited to the senior team until my senior year. And so did I make good on the promise? Yeah. But was, at the time when I was, 636, 632, 175 pounds soaking wet, getting recruited to row heavyweight at Cal. Yeah. That's a bit of a stretch, but then, started to fill out a little bit and started to get the scores down and get the strength up. So, Craig saw something in me and that other programs didn't see. Washington didn't see it.
Yeah. So I think it's an awesome segue. And I think that thank you for pointing that out, because we talked about it on our last episode when we had Steve Capola on, where, he was a really big guy. He was like the biggest guy on his team. He was, he's, well past 6'5", 6'6" almost. Dan, for those in the audience that don't know, Dan's about 6'7". So like these are big guys. And to your point, we talked about on our last episode too, just to again, close the loop for the audience. The league that you're talking about, the IRA league, is the most competitive league in the country. It is the 1A. It's it's the top of the top and the fastest of the fastest. So
it's Olympic
to your point,
development.
it's an Olympic development feeder system. That's where the Olympians for the U.S. get kind of plucked out of, as well as a lot of international guys. So I do think it is a valid point you bring up. At that height and weight, with that erg score, you're not necessarily you're not the ones, you're not the 5-star recruit per se, right? So there's something more to that, which I think that the process that Dan's going to want to probably ask you about here, of just simply like talk about that fill in, talk about, I have a ton of questions about the Cal experience. So we're going to get to that, because I sat on the other side of the starting line from that, for a lot of those wins you had, defeats I had, Dan and I both had,
defeats everybody had, but
yeah. So we also got to row a lot looser and freer because we didn't have we didn't have a streak on the line. But that said, Dan, I know we wanted to dig into that a little bit about the process and mindset and all that.
Well, I think one of the important things that we always try and help each other with on this podcast, but it's also really to help our audience, is like, you can't get anywhere good without a grind. And you got to learn to love the grind type of thing. I'm heartbroken right now that Mike Tyson has to delay this fight. I just am. I love Mike Tyson for so many reasons. Growing up watching him fight, his story, what he did, how he's a student of the sport. But he has one of my favorite quotes as an athlete, and that's, you got to learn to do the stuff you hate, like the way you do the stuff you love. And I think that's a really eloquent way of describing what the grind is. So how did you discover your ability to grind? Like, what did you do to grind? And what did you use to like hone that edge when you were in it?
That's a really good question. There's that quote that's out there, love what you do and you'll never work a day in your life. And, I mean, it to a certain extent, like, we kind of chuckle about it, but like, guys, I was obsessed. I was just obsessed with rowing. And I was obsessed with it at a high school level, when you're not even on a truly high performing functional team, right? That's not to say that high school rowing can't be fast, can't be productive, but it's just not college level or Olympic level. And so getting introduced into Cal, for example, and that experience and stepping in there as a freshman and looking around and being like, that guy just went to junior worlds and that guy went to U23s and it's, oh, is that Seb Bea? Like you have all these sort of like moments of like, whoa, like where am I? You know, and it's overwhelming. And it's exciting and it's nerve-wracking and it's all these different things. And so, I mean, I had a problem. Like I would like not tell Gladstone I had a fever so that I could show up and row. I'm like, it'll break. It'll break while I'm rowing. It's fine. It's fine. Like I had like a serious problem going on where everything just sort of revolved around like, have I gotten my studies done? Have I gotten my sleep? Have I gotten this done, that done, so that I can just go and I can do what it is that I love to do. And so, you know, I think what's interesting for me is I don't remember the high school experience nor the Cal experience as the grind. But oh, do I remember the national team as the grind. Right? That's where I remember the grind. And I think I remember it as a grind for probably reasons that are different than would be traditional reasons, right? If you think about the traditional grind, it's like, oh, the volume and I'm tired and I don't want to do this and I don't want to. It had nothing to do with that. It had nothing to do with that. It wasn't, I didn't mind being tired. I didn't mind putting the time in. I didn't mind going to practices. I mean, yeah, there's always going to be times that that's going to come and that's going to hit you. It was more environmental for me. And it was,
you're saying mental.
Environmental.
But
yep.
As a product of that, was that a mental grind or because you're saying
yeah, it became a mental and emotional grind.
Okay.
So, you know, you take a kid from California who, you know, if you had to guess, if somebody stuck a gun to your head and said, what's the weather? You're like 75 degrees and sunny. 95% of the time you're right. Well, it's not like that in Princeton, New Jersey all the time, right? And so when you grow up in that environment and the Cal environment as well, where it's just sort of like, yeah, still in California, going to Princeton and, you know, seeing snow that you live in, not snow that you went to go see, right? Seeing things freeze over, daylight, you know, decreasing. And then you couple that with just how serious and cutthroat and, you know, quote unquote, professional things become, right? And so that environment, you know, at the time that I was there at the Princeton Training Center, you know, full time in 2001 and 2002, that environment was one that there wasn't anything standing in my way, but there wasn't necessarily any help either from that environment, right? So it, you know, I know myself, I perform best with a coach who's going to tell me like it is, but also find ways to kind of help me along, or a system that's going to find ways to help me along. And in Princeton, it's kind of like the feeling at the time, which was really an accurate feeling for no other reason than it was just the way that it was. If not you, it's going to be somebody else. There were so many guys from you know, 97 to 2000, and guys coming up in the late 90s into early 2000s and 2001 and beyond. There was so much talent. There was so much talent and so much drive and just all these great athletes and great guys. So it was a tremendous time to be there and to be a part of it. And I was part of it for 2 years, but it was also an environment that for me, that ground me down a bit. That the Princeton Training Center did not work for me. It worked for a lot of people. And it obviously worked because there's a gold medal 8 from 2004. So it worked, right? It worked, but it didn't work for me. And that led to my departure from the training center in early 2003.
Dude, that's so awesome. And it's definitely kind of the reverse of like growing up on the East Coast and never like travel was never a thing that my family did. So rowing became my, you know, my way to see, not first just outside of kind of the tri-state, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey area where family lived, but like the world and beyond. And I had to say, yeah, you guys are soft as hell living in California. You
You're
guys
not
are-
wrong. You're not
You
wrong.
are-
You're not
Yeah.
wrong.
I remember talking to you guys about training, and I was like, oh God, I just do like all these ergs, and you guys like, oh, what do you mean we're still rowing? And they'd be like, what?
Mhm.
Yeah. So,
So
dude, that's incredible.
yeah, by the way, side note, it took me going into my professional life before I ever got a flight to California, so I understand what you're saying, Dan. Weirdly enough, there's I want to just unpack something real quick if I can, Luke. So I want to come back to like you still went to the games in 04, so we're going to talk about what that was, and yeah, because you finished in 03, you still go to the games in 04. Just we'll get to that in a second. But I think it's a really, really important thing that I think our audience wants to know. I know I want to know. I think Dan does too. About the Princeton experience was a grind, and it was, I know what you're saying. I was there in the same year you were in that 01 summer to start things, right? It was an interesting vibe for sure.
So much talent, guys. Like,
Tons of
just
talent.
again for the audience, almost every school broke their school record at that year's sprints or Pac-12s. I'm pretty sure, and we can get Gary Caldwell on here one day to like. But at that point, I think the talent that was coming back from the Olympics, because international recruiting had really started to pick up in around 96. So everybody was trying to get international. So the talent pool, just because the more diverse you make any population, the better it gets. So we had this influx of like international talent with a lot of US talent. And that was all culminating in like a lot of our senior years. Like Justin, you were younger, but
yeah,
the pack was also getting a lot closer together. Cause I mean, Luke, you're going to be able to really explain this. And I hope this ties into what you're thinking about, Justin, but
yeah, it is.
Like the dominance that you guys had as your opponents, right? As your opponents, it was just, especially my first 3 years at Northeastern, because like I was in the trucks at my freshman year at Northeastern, right? The third final. So by senior year, to help turn around Northeastern's program to be in the final with you guys, like that was somewhat of a victory for us. Just to like, we were dumb when we tried to go after you guys, but there's this culmination of this talent from 97, which a lot of those guys that, we know in that junior team camp, and which is why I brought it up, became just gunners. Even if they didn't make that junior team by senior year of 2001, that's those guys that got cut from the 97 team mostly became gunners in their collegiate team. Yeah. Like the washout rate of the junior team was huge for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
so that's exactly where I'm going, Dan. I think what I wanted to try to touch on before we get to the Olympic piece and the selection into the Olympic piece, is like I'm just trying to understand a little bit about the mindset, honestly, of, again, Dan and I had a different experience, even though we sat on the same starting line as you. Like, I'm going to be very transparent on this podcast. We knew we were not going to beat the Cal men's varsity 8 in that final. We were hoping to be on the podium. So we weren't racing for second place. We were racing to be nipping at third, maybe. Okay. Being very transparent. And by the way, I have a different perspective, Dan, because I wasn't going backwards down the course. I was the one watching you pull away. So I want to understand a little bit of what's the discrepancy besides the weather of the Cal experience. And honestly, like, I'm interested to understand the pressures that were or were not there, and maybe the wizardry that you can help us understand, because I'll be honest, I was jealous that Steve Gladstone was your coach and not mine. But just how you are, like, I think that winning breeds winning, number one. So I understand that. But then, I mean, to string it along, and again, this is for the audience. I mean, you've probably counted it up, but every heat, every race, every Pac-10, every national championship heat, semi, final, never to lose a race, like, it's unheard of. I mean, I don't know if anybody else was in the same class as you and did that same streak as you, or I don't know if you're the lone soldier who did that, but I would imagine in the history of rowing, there's probably, if anybody else did it with you, you could tell us. I don't think anybody else ever done that. So
my
like
my
how
understanding,
yeah.
sorry, real quick, like at Cal, yes, I was the one guy because
Okay.
there were people with one loss on their
Okay.
record at Cal, for example, and either that came through freshman rowing or they were not in the varsity and then in the JV or whatever it is, and,
Sure.
and switched to different positions. So there were a lot of guys who were very close to that. So you have to be when
Sure.
it's the squad. It's not just one person racing an 8. I believe before my time there were some, allegedly something similar happened at Cornell in the 50s, but I don't know if that I don't know. Maybe
So
maybe
modern
Steve would be
era,
able to tell us.
modern
And
era.
then modern era, and
Sure.
then after us, I believe after my time, there may be some who had a similar experience at Washington, but I can't speak to that either. So
Okay.
yeah, I mean it's definitely a distinction. It's a rare distinction, and it's a weird distinction in a team sport.
So you have at least a 40-year buffer around you. Let's put it that way. Right? 20 years on one side, at least, 20 years.
Yeah,
on
I guess
the
so.
other.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. So let's say in the last 50 years, safe to say, if we can find the needle in the haystack, cool.
Mhm.
Okay. But
Well,
going back,
yeah, and you might, if that's the case, the distinction is because there was a Harvard group right after you that Malcolm Howard was asked, Malcolm Howard wrote at Harvard.
Sure.
Unique fun fact about that, I think the only gold medalist from Harvard, male. I don't know if that's still true, but it was for a while. But I think he might have lost a heat or a semi or something like that. I don't know. And the Washington legacy that Callahan and McGee coached, I don't know if there might be somebody. I don't know. I'll ask McGee. Plus we're gonna try and get him on here anyway. So, but I don't know if they're American either. And that's kind of why I brought up the international recruiting stat is like for me, you were this, right? Represent us.
Mm-hmm.
Like you gave us a lot of confidence knowing that you were in our system. Like that, like knowing that Luke Walton was in our system in 01, like it was like, yeah, we got Luke Walton.
but just to go back, I guess I just want to understand the vibe in that boathouse at Cal, where like, okay, you have the one or two other guys that may have lost a heat or were in a JV boat, whatever it was. Like, you still have a insane depth and mentality in that boathouse. And by the way, like, again, outsider looking in, you might have a couple guys that lost 3 or 4 races in their collegiate career, and it was like, oh yeah, they lost 3 or 4 races. Like the rest of us lost like 50%. Okay, so I think and then you try to go for gold, when you could. But I think that's what I want to understand, what was that like, because you kind of talked about it in like this really amazing way. That sounds awesome. Like you didn't talk about any pressure. You talked about just like, we just went out and we rode in the sunshine, and
like, what was your
so
mindset?
I just want to
What was your
understand
mindset?
that. Yeah.
What was your mindset in that environment to like not only survive but thrive?
Yeah. Well, I think the vibe, if you will, was Gladstone.
Yeah.
And then what supported that vibe, and I'll dive into it a little bit more, but it's important to point out that what supported the vibe were the guys that were brought in. Mm-hmm. And the type of guys that were brought in. And that, at the time, with freshman rowing and Craig being our freshman coach, he and Gladstone together really knew how to identify the guys. And I know that because I had the privilege of being able to row with them and to row alongside them, and also to row against them within the squad. It was very competitive. There's always something competitive happening every single day at Cal. So if you're in the 2/8 that Gladstone is coaching and you're doing arms only, you're figuring out within the constraints of whatever it is that you're doing, you're figuring out how to get your bow ahead. And that was the mentality every single day. Didn't matter what lineup you were in, didn't matter, what any of the switches were, didn't matter if you were doing arms only, doing, 14, 16, 18, 20 for 40 minutes straight because you can row forever in the estuary. Didn't matter if you were doing, 4 by 8 minutes in Cox 4s with switches. Every single day there was some competitive aspect of what we were doing, and the mandate was figure out how to get ahead, right? If you're in Cox 4s and you're at a 30, you figure out how to get ahead at 30. If you're at 31 and you're 7.5 minutes into an 8-minute piece, Gladstone calls it, everybody rows back to the start, and you do it again. And so it was an atmosphere in which we learned how to compete against one another. And it was also an atmosphere that a lot of athletes talk about the word transparency, right? They always say, oh, there's just not enough transparency on this team. There's not enough transparency. And the way that transparency showed up at Cal was, cool, you're in the varsity today.
Yep.
And there were many instances in which somebody was not in the varsity the next day. In 2000, we came home from winning the San Diego Crew Classic. And then we immediately started seat racing, and we had a different lineup 3 days later. So there was no kind of, you're in the boat and this is it. It was every day you were working to demonstrate why you should be where you should be. And that was the environment. And the guys, everybody bought into it. Everybody subscribed to it. And so, there were guys that would be unhappy with boat placement, but they would have the ability to do something about it. You were not stuck. You didn't feel like, oh man, I'm in the 2V, I deserve to be in the varsity, and there's no chance. That wasn't how it worked at all. And so that was great. And there was in 2001, I think it was, Gladstone gave a speech before the San Diego Crew Classic, and it really stuck in my mind. And the line that really sticks with me from what he said was, I had to make tough decisions on these initial lineups. I'm not asking you to agree with it, but I am asking you to align. And so there was no chance for anybody to have a pity party. There was no, that was just it. If you ended up where you didn't want to be, well, show him, and you have the opportunity. So, there was true leadership there. The buck always stopped with Gladstone, but there was also just great intra-squad dynamics and internal leadership and competition. And that's what I remember. That's why I wanted to go down to the boathouse every day, because I knew we were going to go down to the boathouse. And even if it was steady state, you still got to compete, right? Even if it was technical, still got to compete. It wasn't boring. It wasn't long. It wasn't boring. We didn't do nearly as much volume as the other teams. Nowhere near as much volume as any other teams. But we always were out there competing. It's a competitive sport. We raced. And it was just a tremendous environment, because everybody who I had the privilege of rowing with, they wanted to win. They were there to win. And they didn't walk around talking about it, but the way that they rowed, they wanted to win.
I mean, you talk about the guys that you were in those boats with, and I know who they are from not only competing against them at Cal, but then on the national team. And just for perspective of your day to day of who it was against. Seb Bea, silver medal in the pair from 2000. If you're in the audience and you're an oarsman or oarswoman, go watch that race. Save the U.S. team's men's side from not coming home with no hardware in 2000. Jake Wetzel, 3-time Olympian, 2 countries, gold in 08, kicking my ass and Steve's, and silver in 2004 in the straight 4 by narrow, such a tight margin against Pinset and Cracknell. The Pinset's 4th, right? So Knight, Pinset, The only one greater than him is Redgrave, who Pinsett, you could argue, like helped Redgrave get his last 3. So like Jake, such a tight race against them to the wire. I mean, who else was in those boats besides like those 2 guys?
Scott Franzen.
Like
Yeah.
head coach at Cal, silver medalist in the pair, like narrowly losing to James Tompkins, who is by far one of the best oarsmen ever, period. So
We got all the Serbs from
you had Nito from Norway, right? In the double, one of the epic races of 2004 against Akil, like where it became a 7-boat final in the Olympics, like more competitive in the double than ever. Like these are your day-to-day guys that you're rowing with. So I'm just going to ask one more time because it's just so intriguing. Like being one of your closest friends is, I really want to know, we talked about your grind, we talked about your mindset, and this might come to the national team, but I think it's really interesting because of your such unique collegiate experience. Is like, can you share with us, if you feel open to it, like what was a dark moment, if you had one at Cal, where you maybe doubted yourself, but then you just took that and made it like your best reason for why you were good? Like, how did you know in Cal with all that competition, I'm good enough to be here? In fact, I'm good enough to be one of the best. Like what moment? Because I think for me, and we talked a little bit about Steve and Justin, and just talking to our cohort, all of us had a really good gut check on the way to being good. And so to me, it's like, I would love to hear a little bit more about that, Justin. I think, you and I love talking about that off the mic. Steve, we lived it together. So like, what was it like, man? Like, when was that gut punch to you that you just like took it and then made it one of your best weapons?
Yeah, I think the best way to describe it is to kind of set the tone. And I think I did a little bit earlier. As a freshman, you walk into that boathouse and you're looking around. You're just like, what? The imposter syndrome is real. You're walking around with world's medalists and Olympians and under 23 and U19, and you're just this kid from San Diego that like, all right, here we go, guys, and I'm happy to be here. Like that's literally how it starts. Like just so excited to be around you guys, and
it's only 55 in San Francisco.
Exactly. And so, you walk into that, and again, we had freshman rowing, and I think the blessing that I had in freshman rowing was I needed that intermediate step. But because we had freshman rowing, it forced Nito Simonson to be a freshman with me instead of making the varsity. And it forced Jake Wetzel to row freshman his first year. And granted, at the time, Jake was new to rowing, but he was figuring it out really fast. He went to Worlds for Canada in the pair the summer after his freshman year, after freshman rowing, having never rowed a varsity stroke in an intercollegiate program.
Was Jake a walk-on?
Yeah, he was a cyclist and was doing professional cycling. And I do not know what the connection was there. You'll have to ask Jake that story about how you got involved.
Cal, dude, you got Brandon Shaw, who was a part of the San Francisco Ballet.
Yeah, he was a classically trained dancer, right?
Cal, yep. you get some winners at Cal, baby.
So you walk into that environment, and freshman year was it was a rocky road, and it was Craig telling me like, oh, I don't know if you're gonna make the freshman boat. Like you got to step up, I'm like, man, if I can't even make the freshman boat, what's gonna happen, the next year? So make the freshman boat. We have an incredible season against a really impressive freshman crew from Washington, and we managed a great year. And the year before us was the Uber freshman crew for Washington with who was in there? Mike Chait was in there. Eric Funk. And Scott's pair partner. Come on. Why is this Franzen's pair partner?
Calder.
And those guys. And so they were the year ahead of us. And they just had their tremendous season. Anyways, we have our own season, and then we move into sophomore year. And there was a moment kind of coming into sophomore year where it was so very overwhelming. And then I just remember having a thought where it was like, but I'm here every day. And I have the same coach as all these guys. I have the same access to all the things that these guys have access to. I'm doing the same workouts. Why not me? Why not me? And it really clicked. We actually erged a lot in '99, a lot in the fall of '98 and the spring of '99. That was the best Cal erg team that we ever had. And so a lot of progress was made. I went from 632, 630 end of high school. I went down to 618 my freshman year, and then I was 602 sophomore year before Crew Classic. So 602 at 182. So
For the audience, that's Hull in the Mail at 182 pounds.
Yes, I was Steve. Coach Gladstone would post some weight adjusted scores on there, and nobody liked me at all in those moments. And I was like, "Hey, that looks pretty good." Yeah. But the moment, Dan, really was on the heels of that, going through the seat racing sophomore year, and then I can still see it to this day. I know Coach Gladstone's handwriting because as long as he's been coaching, it's been on yellow legal pad. And he writes out all the lineups, and he writes out different things and workouts, and he would post them. And I still, to this day, remember the snapshot in my head, seeing my name on the first potential varsity lineup for the Crew Classic. And then there was some switches, and we made some changes, and I was bow, and I was out, and I was this, and I was that. And then the finalized lineup went in, and my name was up there on 7th seat. And it was literally in that moment, 2 weeks before the San Diego Crew Classic, that I was like, yeah, okay, this is it. This is what I'm meant to do. And I became an Olympian at Cal, right? Mm-hmm. All that needed to follow afterwards was all the training and the hours and the right timing. And I was not ready in 2000 to try out. I know some of the guys that I went to U23s with came back and tried out in 2000. I thought that was too audacious at that point, so I didn't do it. But in 2001, I was ready to make that push. So it was really that sophomore year that I was like, I'm ready to go. And then it was the summer of '99. I got invited to the Pan American Games camp, did a bunch of racing and seat racing there. And then on the heels of 20-stroke seat races, then that boat was sorted out, and I was told, well, you're young enough to go to U23s, so we got to figure out where to put some of these guys for Pan Am, so you're going to go to U23s. So then I moved over to U23s, and that was an incredible boat with the not worst lineup, just the craziest lineup ever. It's that 5 seat. I was in the 5 seat. Jason Flickinger was in my boat.
Wait. I got cut from that team, so don't say it's worst lineup. And you guys like
no. It's a great lineup. Great guys. They put me in the 5 seat. They put Graham Taylor in 6. They put Flick in 3. They put Eric Winters in 2 seat. Eric Winters.
But then did you guys start off? Didn't we? Because we were training, mm-hmm. And as a lineup started to fill out. And I think it was just really funny because we had this whole U23 group training at Cornell. Mm-hmm. So Steve, this is before the boathouse was redone that you're at now, and there was the bunkhouse, right? So there's like the mosquito laden, like no air conditioning, middle of Ithaca summer. Like, do you have open the doors for fresh air and get mosquitoes, or do you get like mosquito bites all night and like no fresh air? So we were just waiting for the Pan Am guys that were at camp to get cut and just take half the boat out. It's like literally the U23 camp was literally just for 4 seats. And you already knew McGee and Winters had 2 of them. So it was literally like, because they were just, they were up and coming from Brown. So it was just really interesting when you guys because did you ever go to Cornell, or did you just show up when we came to
No, we went back to Cornell. You guys came down for the Independence Day Regatta. And that's right. We did Independence Day Regatta.
That's when I got cut.
Yeah, we were at the Temple Boathouse, launching and landing there. It was so swampy, hot, and disgusting. And that's all I remember about that summer.
That was
But yeah.
it was that. But Independence Day Regatta was an epic race because it had the U.S. senior team and the Canadian senior team, and then the Canadian Pan Am team and the U.S. Pan Am team, and then the U.S. U-23 team, Canadian U-23 team, and then we had U-23 B teams, I believe. So there was this awesome final of like North America's best oarsmen, period. And this was also at a time when the U.S. men were on their road to winning 3 back-to-back-to-back world championships. So, I mean, Faber, because we had the same training area, and Steve, Chris Aarons, who was the stroke of this cohort, was a Princeton alum. But remember that American Heroes poster?
Yeah, so it's funny. You said that about that team. So that was for me an aspirational time. I was just finishing high school, but I actually remember. I think Vespoli might have handed out these posters, or somebody did, and it was that world's team. I had that poster in my room. Like, yeah. I remember, like, to your point,
was it a Charles giveaway? Was it a Charles?
I don't know. No, it wasn't. I mean, I had it in Florida, so it was probably something that.
But it was also signed. It was signed by everybody from that '99 boat specifically.
It was the '99 boat. It was a black boat. I remember, black Vespoli. But
it didn't come in a 2-pack with like the jockey underwear.
No,
as well. No, that you didn't get both posters.
No, it wasn't shrink wrapped. It was weird. But I do. It was very aspirational, though. I remember, like, I mean, I can still see the picture in my head of that boat. To your point, Dan. So it's a really stacked time. But I think it's. I don't want to get. I know that we're going down memory lane a little bit, but I think I wanted to see if I could circle back real quick, though, Luke. You said something that I wrote down and I find very, very really engaging for the audience about how you made the Olympic team while you were at Cal. So your makeup of training, mindset, growth, speed came really formatively at Cal, not so much on the national team. I think that it's good for the audience to understand too, like some training situations, just like in life and business and relationships, whatever it is, just don't fit for everybody else. Doesn't mean you're a bad person. Doesn't mean that you're not a high performer. Just something's not flowing. Right. And I think that everybody on this call has probably had different situations like that over the course of their life. But I do want to go back to where I put a pin in it for a second of, okay, you finish your 03 national team experience. How do you go from there to actually going to the games, in 04, and what boat were you in? How did that go? Because I think that it's really important for the audience to know that just the connection of that story. I agree with you. I think that the collegiate rowing, we've had this conversation on another episode, but the collegiate rowing scene at that time was stacked. And obviously, if you came through some of these systems, juniors, under 23s, what have you, you were amongst, very high performing people, and you were used to going fast. But I want to understand that bridge for you, because I think it'll be important for the audience to know. And then I think it's a good jump off point for us to say, okay, what came next?
Yeah. So Cal graduation should have been the spring of 2001.
Okay.
Right. But I didn't. The course load was a little bit lighter through that, and I took some courses that didn't necessarily lead into what I needed to do to complete all of the requirements. And so there was a 5th year on the calendar for me to finish school. So I finished in 01, and I go to the summer of 01, and I'm fortunate enough to make the 8, make the bow seat of that 8. We go to Lucerne and narrowly miss out on a medal, which was really tough in and of itself. And then, there's sort of this exhale moment of, okay, let's regroup. Let's, and a personal moment of, okay, I need to regroup. I need to get my head straight. I need to finish my degree, and then I'm headed back out to Princeton in the spring of 2002. And so went back training, did the training the best that I could, trained with people when I could, traveled to train with people and wrote pairs when I could. But in reality, showed up in the summer of 2002 not where I needed to be, just not where I needed to be. And looking back on it now, that's very, very clear. But when you're in the midst of everything and it's all just happening and you're just sort of like, no, I'm good. Everything's good. I've done a lot of training. I'm where I'm supposed to be. But I showed up in the summer of 2002 to an even more competitive squad than I'd seen in 2001. And there were guys that had been doing the grind there day in and day out in Princeton, improving, positioning themselves, and everybody wanted to row in that 8. And so I was not in a position for selection for the 8 nor the straight 4 that summer. I found myself in the Cox 4 and went to Seville, raced in Seville that summer, had a decent heat, got ourselves into the final, and then things just for one reason or two just fell apart. And so that was the experience there. And okay, fine. Little break after that, back to Princeton. It's now the fall of 2002 and getting into the winter of 2003. And that's where that grind was really kind of hitting me. There was clarity that I wasn't part of the group that Mike Tatey was looking at seriously for the Worlds. And if he's not looking at me seriously for Worlds in 2003, man, where am I going to be in 2004, right? And that was very mentally tough for me, coupled with just, kind of my first full winter in Princeton, and things kind of started to unravel. I was shaken. I was depressed. I was having a lot of trouble dealing with everything that was going on. And so early spring of 2003, raced in the NSR, did terribly. I think I was in the 3rd level final or maybe I don't even remember. These things I like to kind of blur out. It was a tough time. It was just a tough time, right? So I can't recall that detail for you. Okay. But I can still see my name up on that yellow legal pad when it was time to get into that 8, right? So so I was in a really tough place. And on the backside of that NSR, I had a long conversation with my family. I had a long think. And the conclusion was, this isn't working. There was no next to that. There was just, this isn't working. This isn't healthy. I don't know what's going to solve it, but I know remaining here in this situation, I'm only going to spiral further. And so I was at least smart enough or aware enough, self-aware enough to know, like, this is a problem for me, and this could be a real problem if I let it become a real problem. And so I called Mike and I said, Mike, this isn't working for me. I got a feeling this isn't working for you either. So I don't know what I'm doing next, but I need to leave the camp. And Mike said, okay.
So so that, like, that's a huge, listen, I mean, you put in 4 years, right? 99 to 2003 at that point. It takes a lot of, a Yiddish term is called chutzpah, just to censor it for this podcast. But it takes a lot of gall. It takes a lot of fortitude to do that, especially with, and again, for our audience and everybody on this, everybody hosting could give you their own accolades or stories about Mike Tatey, but Mike was not it sounds like Steve was a bit more of a transparent, I would say a little bit more of a, not that Mike wasn't transparent, but Steve certainly had a way of kind of doing things. And again, you made it very clear that, like, there was something very magical about seeing his handwriting with your name, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas I don't know what the conversation was like with Mike. It sounds like it was very clear, like, sure, yeah, see ya, right? I remember, again, like, I didn't go nearly as far as some of my co-hosts or some of the folks on the podcast. When I was at the national team, it was very like, hey, thanks for coming this summer. We're not going to be using you for the Lucerne Worlds that you mentioned. Yeah, like, what was that conversation like? Right. I think that that's like a full
Well, I think
stop.
it was very,
It's like
I
a
think
full stop.
conversation
Like,
was,
yeah.
it was very matter of fact, but like,
So I'm not surprised to hear.
it's pro row at that point, right?
Yep.
Like we know what we're signing up for,
Sure.
right? And and you don't get at that level, there's no participation awards, right?
No.
There's no participation awards.
Mhm.
There, you know, you're there trying to do something unreasonable and being an unreasonable human being in that process, right? Signing up to try to achieve something that so few people even have the chance of trying to do it. And once you're in that atmosphere, so many of the people that you're amongst don't make it, right? So, like, yeah, like, would I have liked, like, oh well, you know, let's figure something out, like, you know, to in that egocentric moment to feel more valued, that
Sure.
my sacrifice or my contribution meant something. Sure, that's the egotistical side of things. But the reality is, like, everybody who signs up for this process who wants to be an Olympian is signing up for something that is so incredibly hard. And just because you work hard and because you think you deserve it or what, like, none of that matters. It doesn't matter because you either do it or you don't. And in that moment, I wasn't doing it.
Mhm.
And I think if I were Mike receiving that call, then he would be like, Walton doesn't want it enough. And I can't fault him for that. Because he's like, he's going to look around to his left and right and he's going to find 40 dudes that are dealing with the same conditions and the same everything that's going on. And they're still there. They're still engaged. They're not calling Mike to say, hey, you know, I'm out. So Mike and I have never spoken about that. Like, you know, if it even registered at that point, he had other things he was dealing with, right? Like building that 8,
Yeah.
for example.
Yeah.
And I wasn't part of that, but I didn't have that right either, because if I were in a different environment, could I have been performing at a different level where I could have been more useful to that system? Sure. But the reality is the reality. It was in Princeton. That's where it was. That's where the guys who were getting it done were thriving, and we're moving things forward. So, you know, in the moment, yeah, it's very easy to be like, you know, F this, F that, F you, F everybody, I'm out.
Yeah.
But that's that internal egotistical side. And as you get older, you look back and you're like, well, yeah, I mean, I was as expendable as the next guy. There was nothing that prevented me from, you know, I shouldn't be granted safety nets that no one else is granted, right? And that, I think, is also, and this is probably a conversation for a totally different time, but like back then, safe spaces, mental health, like how are you actually doing? Like none of that was part of the deal. It just wasn't part of the deal. It's, you know, are you performing? Are you not performing? And that was it. And now, you know, fortunately, and Dan was talking about this earlier, you know, with Michael Phelps, Simone Biles, like others talking about mental health. Well, you know, we can talk about it. So was I going through a mental health episode there that could have potentially gotten a lot worse if I stuck around? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so all I knew at that moment was that I needed to leave. And so I actually wasn't that worried about Mike's response. It would have been nice if he disagreed and be like, no, you know, you should stay. But at the same time, I'm not sure the result nothing would have really changed. So in letting me go, I think that is actually one of the things that just facilitated a quick and easy movement into, okay, well, now what?
Yeah.
How do I do this?
I think you alluded to this earlier, and I do want to get to how you eventually go to Athens as an Olympian. But I think to your point earlier, and again, like I agree with you. Mike has a job to do. He's got bigger fish to fry. If one guy is not feeling the vibe, that's okay. He's got other things to do. And again, I respect him for that. And I respected him for the, you know, for everything that I had an experience with him on. I think that the piece is is more simply to what you said earlier with the Cal experience. Same boathouse, same coach, same tools, same atmosphere. Again, some people thrive, some people, survive or thrive, right? So again, like to your point, fair is fair. That's what you're signing up for. So tell us though, that happens. Huge pivotal moment, I would have to believe, in your rowing career. We haven't even got to you going overseas yet, for the Cambridge stuff. But where do you then kind of collect and then go forward? I think that's really important for our audience to understand that mindset.
You guys can continue, and this is entertaining. I have to really take a leak, so
we're gonna keep that in the edit. But go ahead.
I think you should. You guys can continue. I have Bluetooth, and I'll listen, or you can pause. It's up to you.
Yeah, just make sure you're muted.
I'm muted.
Or should we pause?
I think we should pause. That's all for today's show. Fast Friends is a Metal Factory production. All opinions expressed are our own and those of our guests. If you like our show, follow along or subscribe with us wherever you get your content and podcasts. Thanks for listening.